Hey there. Tonight, we're going back to another people of my life. Way back to the windswept coastal deserts of ancient Peru, around 400 BCE, where the Paracas people mastered something your modern surgeons would find terrifying. Brain surgery, without anesthesia, without antibiotics, without even basic sterilization. And somehow, they succeeded more often than they failed. You are standing on red sand beneath an endless sky, and tonight, you will witness what should be impossible. You will become Tupac, a young apprentice priest, learning to cut into human skulls with tools made of obsidian and bronze. You will hold the weight of life and death in your trembling hands. You will see warriors with their heads split open by war clubs, their brains exposed to the dry coastal air. And you will learn how your teachers saved them. So, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let me take you to a place where medicine was ritual, where surgery was prayer, and where opening a skull was the only mercy left for the dying. Leave a comment below telling me which ancient civilization fascinates you most, and from what time period you'd want to experience life. Now, let's begin your journey as a healer in a brutal age. You wake before dawn in your stone chamber, the Pacific wind howling through gaps in the woven reed door. Your master, Amaru, the head priest surgeon, has summoned you early. Today marks your 3rd year of training, and today you will observe your first true trepanation, the opening of a living skull. The air smells of dried fish, quinoa porridge, and the sharp mineral tang of copper tools being sharpened. Your sleeping mat of woven totoro reeds still holds your body's warmth, but duty pulls you from comfort. You are 17 years old, lean from coastal living, your skin bronzed by relentless sun. Your black hair hangs to your shoulders, and you wear a simple tunic of brown alpaca wool. Around your neck dangles a small turquoise amulet, your only inheritance from your father, who died in a raid 3 harvests ago. Outside, the settlement of Cerro Colorado stretches across the hillside. 200 souls living in stone and adobe dwellings, their lives governed by the ocean's rhythm and the constant threat of highland raiders. The Paracas people are fishermen, weavers, and warriors, but above all, survivors. You step into the pre-dawn darkness, bare feet finding familiar paths between the homes. Other apprentices emerge from their quarters. There are 5 of you in total, all training under the 3 master surgeons of the settlement. Smoke rises from cook fires, carrying the scent of roasting anchovies. Somewhere, a child cries. A dog barks at shadows. You reach Amaru's surgical chamber, a separate building, set apart from the living quarters, its walls painted with geometric patterns in red and yellow ochre. The entrance is covered by a heavy textile bearing images of condors and serpents. You pause, steadying your breath, then push inside. Inside, Amaru kneels beside his instruments, arranging them with ritualistic precision. Your master is 50 winters old, his face weathered into deep canyons of wisdom. His hands, you notice for the 1000th time, never tremble. He wears the sacred red headband of the master surgeons, adorned with tiny gold ornaments that catch the lamplight. His tunic is finer than yours, dyed a deep crimson with cochineal insects, marking his elevated status. "Sit, Tupac," he commands without looking up. His voice is rough as volcanic stone. "Today you see your first opening of the skull. The patient is Chasqui, a runner from the northern villages. 5 days ago, Highland warriors ambushed his group. A war club struck his head, here. Amaru taps his own temple. Beneath the skin, his skull cracked. Now pressure builds inside his head, squeezing his mind like a fist. Without the cutting, he dies by sunset. You sit cross-legged on the swept earth floor, watching as Amaru lays out the tools. First, the obsidian blades, black volcanic glass sharper than any metal, each flake napped to razor precision. Then bronze scrapers for cutting away flesh. A small hammer and chisel, also bronze, for the bonework itself. Tiny bronze hooks for lifting skin flaps. Reed tubes for suction. Cotton cloth for blood. And finally, a gourd filled with chicha, fermented corn beer, the only mercy for the patient's pain. Remember what I have taught you, Amaru continues, his dark eyes finally meeting yours. The skull protects the sacred seat of thought, but sometimes the skull itself becomes the enemy. We cut away the broken pieces to let the pressure escape. The brain must breathe, Tupac. When it swells and has nowhere to expand, death comes wearing the mask of agony. You nod, though your stomach tightens. You have seen death many times. This is the desert coast, where warfare and fishing accidents claim lives weekly. But you have never seen the brain, that gray mystery that somehow contains memory, speech, love, and rage. The patient arrives carried on a litter by his brother and uncle. Chasqui is 25, a professional runner who carried messages between villages, a vital role in a culture without written language. Now he lies semi-conscious, his head wrapped in llama wool bandages already brown with dried blood. His breathing comes shallow and rapid. His eyes, when they flutter open, show only whites. You help position him on the low wooden platform that serves as the surgical table. His brother, a stocky fisherman named Ilapa, grips your arm. "Save him," he whispers, desperation cracking his voice. "He's all our family has left." You nod, unable to speak past the tightness in your throat. Amaru unwraps the bandages with practiced efficiency. The wound reveals itself. A depression in the right temple where the war club struck. The skin split open in a jagged line, the edges already showing early infection's yellow tinge. You can see the skull beneath. A web of fractures radiating from the impact point, like a shattered clay pot not quite broken through. "Tupac, bring the chicha. Make him drink half the gourd." You cradle Chasqui's head, tipping the fermented beer into his mouth. He chokes, swallows, chokes again. The alcohol is strong, brewed for maximum potency. It's the only anesthetic your people know. Within minutes, Chasqui's tense muscles loosen slightly. Though consciousness doesn't fully leave him, pain will still come, but perhaps dulled enough to bear. Amaru begins cleaning the wound with water boiled that morning and left to cool. You watch as he works, noting every movement. He uses cotton cloth to dab away old blood and pus, exposing the fracture more clearly. Then he takes an obsidian blade, its edge invisible in its sharpness, and begins cutting away the ragged skin edges, creating clean margins around the injury site. The cutting begins in earnest. Amaru extends the skin incision, creating a circular flap around the fractured area. Blood flows, less than you expected, but enough to require constant dabbing with cotton cloths. You kneel beside him, following his silent gestures, handing him instruments before he asks. This is the dance of master and apprentice, practiced until it becomes instinct. Chasqui moans, a sound that starts deep in his chest. His brother turns away, unable to watch. But you cannot turn away. You must witness everything. must learn, must understand how life is preserved through controlled violence. Amaru lifts the skin flap with bronze hooks, pinning it back to expose the fractured bone beneath. The skull here is perhaps the thickness of your thumbnail, cream-colored, but the fractures have created a mosaic of broken pieces, some pressing inward toward the precious brain beneath. You can see tiny shards of bone, sharp as your obsidian blades, that have definitely penetrated the protective membrane called the dura mater. Here is the danger, Amaru says, his voice dropping into teaching mode even as his hands continue working. Hours pass, though they feel like days. The sun climbs higher outside, its light filtering through gaps in the stone walls, creating dusty shafts that illuminate the cramped surgical space. Your knees ache from kneeling, but you dare not move or complain. Amaru works with patient ferocity, removing bone fragments piece by microscopic piece. Finally, the central section of fractured skull comes free in a single piece roughly the size of your palm. Amaru sets it carefully aside on a clay plate. Later, it will be cleaned and kept as a teaching tool, evidence of the surgeon's skill. With the bone removed, you see what few humans ever witness: the dura mater, the tough grayish membrane that sheathes the brain itself. It's torn. A small laceration, perhaps the length of your smallest fingernail, and through it you glimpse the gray-pink surface of the brain, pulsing with the rhythm of Chasqui's heartbeat. The sight paralyzes you with awe and terror. There, in that soft tissue, live all of Chasqui's memories. His mother's face, the paths he ran, the songs he knew, the woman he loved. The membrane is torn, but the brain beneath seems intact. Amaru observes clinically. Good fortune. We will not attempt to suture the dura. This is too dangerous and usually fails. Instead, we allow it to heal naturally, trusting in the body's wisdom. He uses the reed tube to suction away pooled blood and fluid from around the brain. The dark liquid drains into a ceramic bowl, and with its removal, you notice Chasqui's breathing changes, deepens, becomes more regular. Do you see, Tupac? The pressure releases. His brain expands into the space we have created. This is the moment when we know if he will live or die. Watch his eyes. You lean closer. Chasqui's eyelids flutter, then slowly open. His pupils, which had been different sizes, a fatal sign, now match. He looks at Amaru, confusion clouding his gaze, but he sees. He's still present. The critical work complete, Amaru moves to preservation and closure. From a leather pouch, he withdraws strips of thin gold foil, precious metal beaten until it's almost translucent. Gold. Your people have learned through generations of trial and terrible error, does not corrupt flesh the way other metals do. It resists the evil spirits that cause infection. You watch as he carefully places a piece of gold foil directly over the exposed dura mater, covering the tear. The gold conforms to the curved surface of the brain beneath, a shimmering barrier between vulnerable tissue and the hostile world. Over this, he lays a larger piece of gold, covering the entire opening in the skull where bone once was. This gold will remain forever, Amaru explains. In time, new skin will grow over it, and Chasqui will carry this mark of survival until death finds him by some other path. If he fathers children, they will trace their fingers over this metal and remember the day their father cheated the shadow world. Next comes the careful replacement of the skin flap. Amaru uses a bronze needle threaded with human hair, yes, human hair, taken from willing donors, as it's proven stronger and less likely to cause infection than plant fibers. The stitches are small, neat, each one placed with the same precision he used on the bone. 20 stitches total, creating a circular scar that will eventually fade to a thin white line against Chasqui's bronze skin. Finally, the dressing. Clean cotton cloth, soaked in a mixture of herbs. You recognize Malay resin, which prevents corruption, and the ground leaves of medico, which slows bleeding. Layer upon layer of cloth, then secured with more woven strips, creating a protective padding around the surgical site. Chasqui has remained conscious throughout this final stage, though confusion still clouds his eyes. Where? He attempts to speak, his voice a cracked whisper. Safe, Amaru tells him gently. You are safe, runner. Rest now. Your racing days will come again. The relatives carry Chasqui to the recovery chamber, a small room adjacent to the surgical space where patients remain under observation for 5 days following skull opening. You help settle him onto a reed mat spread over clean cotton padding. His brother Ilapa grips Amaru's hands, tears streaming down his weathered face. Thank you, healer. Thank you. The words are inadequate for the miracle witnessed, and everyone present knows it. Amaru accepts the gratitude with humble dignity, then pulls you aside as the family ministers to the patient. Now comes the true test, he says quietly. The surgery is only the beginning. More patients die in the days that follow than during the cutting itself. Infection is the invisible enemy, Tupac. We can see fractured bones and pooled blood, but we cannot see the evil spirits that enter through open wounds and feast on living flesh. He outlines the care protocol. Chasqui must lie still, head elevated, for 5 full days. No solid food, only broth and chicha. The dressing must be changed daily, checked for signs of corruption, foul smell, yellow or green discharge, excessive heat radiating from the wound. If fever comes, if his consciousness clouds, if his speech becomes confused, or his limbs begin twitching uncontrollably, these are signs the spirits have invaded. Then, Amaru says with resignation, there is little to be done except pray to Pachamama and accept the patient's journey to the Shadowlands. You're assigned to watch Chasqui through the first night, part of your training, learning to recognize the subtle signs of deterioration. As darkness falls and the settlement quiets, you sit cross-legged beside his mat, an oil lamp providing feeble illumination. Chasqui sleeps fitfully, occasionally moaning, sometimes muttering incomprehensible words. You check his pulse frequently, feeling the rhythm against your fingertips. Strong, steady, good signs. Outside, the Pacific roars against rocky cliffs, its eternal rhythm a reminder that the ocean cares nothing for human struggle. Some of your people say the ocean remembers everything, every drowning, every successful catch, every boat that returned, and every boat that didn't. Tonight, you hope it remembers one more survival. Dawn finds you hollow-eyed but relieved. Chasqui survived the night with no signs of fever or new bleeding. When Amaru arrives to check his patient, he nods approval at your careful watch. Good. The first night is often when death comes quietly, slipping in while exhaustion weakens the patient's spirit. You kept the vigil properly. The master surgeon unwraps the dressing with gentle efficiency, exposing the surgical site to morning light. The stitches hold firm, the skin edges already beginning the slow process of knitting together. No foul smell emerges, just the metallic scent of old blood, which is normal. The gold foil beneath remains hidden, but its presence provides strange comfort. something pure protecting something precious. After redressing the wound with fresh, herb-soaked bandages, Amaru dismisses you to rest. You stumble to your chamber, fall onto your reed mat, and sleep deeply. Despite the morning sun blazing through gaps in the stone walls, your dreams are filled with fractured bones and pulsing gray tissue, with obsidian blades catching lamplight, with the weight of life and death balanced on the edge of knowledge. You wake mid-afternoon to find one of your fellow apprentices, Weira, shaking your shoulder. "Master Amaru wants you in the teaching chamber," she says. Weira is 16, sharp-minded, training to assist with difficult births as well as trauma surgery. Her presence in the surgical arts is unusual. Most female healers focus exclusively on childbirth and women's ailments, but her talent is undeniable, and Amaru values skill over tradition. In the teaching chamber, Amaru has assembled the fractured skull piece removed from Chasqui, now cleaned and dried. The 5 apprentices gather around as he uses it to explain the anatomy of bone, the outer hard layer, the inner spongy layer, the relationship between thickness and vulnerability. "The skull varies in thickness," he explains, tracing the bone with one gnarled finger. "Here at the temple, it's thin, which is why war clubs aimed here kill so effectively. But here at the crown, the bone is thick as 2 fingernails stacked." The days blend together as Chasqui continues healing. By the 3rd day post-surgery, he's eating solid food, quinoa porridge with dried fish, and speaking in complete sentences, though headaches plague him. "Normal," Amaru assures both patient and family. The brain has been touched by bronze and obsidian. It protests this intrusion, but in time, the pain fades. You continue your regular training alongside monitoring Chasqui. Each morning begins with herb preparation, grinding mole resin, preparing matico poultices, mixing various plant substances into pastes and tinctures. Your hands turn green from handling certain leaves, and the sharp smell of medicinal plants becomes your constant companion. Amaru teaches through demonstration and repetition. You practice suturing on dead fish flesh, learning to space stitches evenly, to tie knots that hold without cutting circulation. You practice using the obsidian blades on fruit, developing the delicate touch required to cut skin without driving the blade too deep. Control. Amaru repeats constantly. Healing requires absolute control. Rage, fear, excitement. These emotions have no place in the surgeon's hands. On the 5th day, Chasqui stands and walks unaided for the first time. His balance wavers. The inner ear was disturbed by the skull fracture, but he manages 3 circuits of the recovery chamber before exhaustion forces him to rest. His brother cries openly, unashamed. 5 days ago, Chasqui was dying. Now he walks. The transformation seems touched by divine favor, though Amaru insists it's merely proper technique, applied with precision. That evening, Amaru invites you to his personal chamber, a rare honor. The space is larger than your own, with walls covered in painted images of previous surgeries. A visual catalog of every skull opening he's performed in 30 years of practice. 43 successful trepanations, each one recorded in careful detail. 12 failures, also recorded. Because, Amaru explains, we learn more from our failures than our successes, though both deserve remembrance. He pours you a cup of chicha from his personal supply. You have the hands for this work, Tupac. Steady, patient. These qualities cannot be taught. Either you possess them or you do not. But technical skill is not enough. There is a weight that comes with this power, Amaru continues, his voice dropping to barely above whisper. Every time we open a skull, we balance on the knife edge between life and death. Sometimes our skill tips the balance toward life. Sometimes the injury is too severe, or the spirits are determined to claim the patient. And despite our best efforts, death comes anyway. These losses, they accumulate here. He taps his chest. Each failure is a stone added to the burden we carry. You listen, the chicha warming your throat, but not quite reaching the cold knot of anxiety forming in your stomach. You've known the theoretical weight of responsibility, but hearing it spoken aloud by your master makes it suddenly terribly real. In 3 moons, when the coastal winds shift and the fishing runs begin, I will allow you to perform your first trepanation under my supervision, Amaru announces. The words hit you like a physical force. 3 months. 3 months to prepare for the moment when another person's life will depend entirely on your shaking hands. Until then, you will observe every surgery I perform. You will ask questions. You will practice on animal skulls until the movements become instinct. That night, sleep comes difficult despite exhaustion. You lie on your reed mat, staring at shadows dancing on the ceiling, imagining the weight of bronze tools in your hands, imagining the moment when you cut into living skull for the first time. Will your hands remain steady? Will you remember the anatomical landmarks, the precise angles required, the subtle signs that indicate danger? The settlement sleeps around you, 200 souls unaware that one of them is lying awake, grappling with the terrifying beauty of the healer's path. Outside, the Pacific roars its eternal song. Somewhere in the darkness, a baby cries. Life continues, indifferent to your fears. Morning comes eventually, as it always does. You rise, perform your ablutions, and report to the surgical chamber. There's no patient today, which means time for practice. Amaru has procured several animal skulls, dogs primarily, as their skull thickness approximates human bone more closely than other available animals. You spend the morning drilling holes through dog skulls with bronze awls and chisels, learning to feel when you're about to break through the inner layer, learning to control the pressure of each hammer strike. It's tedious work, but you understand its necessity. Muscle memory, Amaru calls it. Teaching your hands to know the work independent of conscious thought. 2 weeks pass before the next emergency arrives. A pottery merchant named Puma, traveling from southern villages, collapsed while trading in the settlement's market. Witnesses report he was speaking normally one moment, then seized. His entire body went rigid, his eyes rolled back, and he fell, striking his head on the stone edge of a vendor's platform. Now he lies unconscious, a massive swelling forming on the left side of his skull. You help carry Puma to the surgical chamber on a litter. He's 40 winters old, heavy-set from prosperous living, his body marked by the characteristic clay dust that never quite washes out of a potter's skin. The swelling over his left ear is grotesque, a fluid-filled bulge the size of your fist that seems to grow larger even as you watch. Hematoma. Amaru diagnoses immediately. Blood pooling between the skull and the dura. The fall broke vessels inside his head, and now blood accumulates with nowhere to drain. The pressure will kill him within hours if we don't release it. This case differs from Chasqui's. No visible skull fracture, no obvious wound except the external swelling. The danger lurks entirely inside, invisible, a silent killer squeezing Puma's brain against the inside of his own skull. Amaru explains as he prepares. Sometimes the skull remains intact while the vessels beneath rupture. We must cut through healthy bone to reach the blood. The surgery begins with you administering chicha, though Puma remains unconscious and unresponsive. We give it anyway. Amaru explains. The body still feels pain even when the mind is elsewhere. This small mercy may prevent his spirit from fleeing in shock when we cut. Amaru works faster than during Chasqui's surgery. Speed matters here. as every passing minute adds more pressure. The incision is made, the skin reflected back, revealing the skull beneath. No fractures as predicted, just smooth bone hiding the deadly hemorrhage beneath. The drilling begins. Amaru uses the bronze awl first, creating a starter depression in the bone. Then the tedious work of chiseling, cutting a circular opening larger than needed for chasqui. This must be wide enough to evacuate substantial blood accumulation. You watch the bone thin under Amaru's practiced strikes. Thin. Thinner. Then, a tiny breakthrough. Dark blood immediately begins seeping through the microscopic hole, confirming the diagnosis. When the opening widens sufficiently, blood erupts, not slowly seeping, but actively flowing, dark and thick, carrying with it the pressure that was killing Puma. Amaru has anticipated this, and you're ready with cotton cloths, dabbing and absorbing, trying to maintain visibility of the surgical field while the blood drains. Good, Amaru breathes. Good. The pressure releases. Now we wait and see if we were fast enough. The evacuation continues for several minutes, an astonishing volume of blood that fills the ceramic bowl and requires emptying twice. You've never seen so much blood from a living person who survives. Usually, blood in these quantities means death, but Puma's breathing changes as the blood drains, deepens, becomes more regular, and then, miracle of small miracles, his eyes move beneath their lids. Consciousness hasn't returned fully, but some awareness flickers back. Amaru's weathered face shows satisfaction, but not surprise. He's done this before, many times. The remainder of the procedure follows familiar patterns: cleaning the cavity, placing the gold foil, suturing the skin. Because this skull opening was created rather than resulting from fracture, the circular piece of bone sits intact in a clay dish. Later, it will be offered back to the patient's family as a talisman of survival. As you help dress the wound, Puma's eyes finally open. Confusion clouds them, but he sees. He's present. He survived not only the fall, but the subsequent surgery to drain the killing blood. Rest, Amaru tells him gently. You've traveled further than most men go, and returned to tell of it. The next days establish a routine. Morning practice on animal skulls, afternoon care for recovering patients, both Chasqui and Puma now. Evening instruction sessions where Amaru teaches theory. You learn about the 3 membranes protecting the brain, about the large vessels that run along the skull's inner surface, about the difference between epidural and subdural hematomas, though your people don't use these technical terms. Instead, Amaru speaks of bleeding between bone and membrane, or bleeding between membranes. Chasqui continues improving daily. By 2 weeks post-surgery, he's walking without assistance, his speech clear, his memory intact. The gold plate beneath his scalp is already becoming part of him, his body accepting the foreign metal without rejection. He's begun light work, helping repair fishing nets, a task that doesn't require the intense physical activity of running, but keeps him useful. Your 3rd surgical observation comes unexpectedly, in the depth of night. A runner arrives breathless at Amaru's chamber. There's been a collapse in the southern fishing caves. A young netmaker, only 14 winters old, was struck by falling rock. The damage is severe, the messenger reports. The boy's skull, broken like an egg. You accompany Amaru through darkness, carrying the surgical kit in leather bags slung across your shoulders. The settlement sleeps, but you navigate familiar paths toward the caves where nets are stored and repaired, where the constant ocean moisture makes the stone slippery and dangerous. The scene that greets you is chaos lit by torches, a dozen fishermen crowding around the injured boy, his mother wailing prayers to Pachamama, his father standing silent and gray-faced with shock. The boy, Kusi, lies motionless, blood pooling beneath his head, mixing with cave moisture into pink-tinged puddles. Amaru kneels, examining the damage with hands made steady by decades of emergency work. The injury is catastrophic. The falling rock struck the back of Kusi's skull, crushing a section the size of your palm. Bone fragments press deeply into the brain tissue, and the smell of exposed brain tissue, a strange, sweet, metallic scent, fills the damp cave air. "This is beyond surgery," one of the fishermen whispers. "Let the boy die in peace." But Amaru's face hardens. "Only the dying decide when to die," he snaps. "Until his spirit departs, we fight." He turns to you. "Tupac, we cannot move him in this condition. We operate here, now. Prepare everything." Terror and exhilaration flood through you in equal measure. Cave surgery, insufficient light, contaminated environment. Every factor works against success, yet Amaru has decided to try. You unpack the surgical kit with shaking hands, laying instruments on a woven cloth spread over relatively dry stone. The fishermen position torches for maximum illumination, creating a roughly sterile field. Kusi shows no response to the chicha forced down his throat. He's deeply unconscious, perhaps already dying, but his heart still beats. The surgery begins. Amaru works with speed and precision, cutting away crushed scalp tissue, exposing the destroyed skull section. The bone hasn't merely fractured, it's pulverized, driven inward in countless sharp fragments, all embedded in vulnerable brain tissue. The removal of bone fragments takes hours. Each tiny shard must be lifted carefully. Pulling too quickly causes new bleeding. Leaving fragments behind causes certain infection and death. Amaru's hands never waver, though sweat streams down his face in the humid cave air. You assist, holding torches when fishermen grow tired, dabbing blood, handing instruments. The brain beneath the crushed skull is damaged. You can see the gray matter torn and bleeding, unmistakable evidence of trauma that no surgery can fully repair. But Amaru works with grim determination, removing every fragment he can find, creating the best conditions possible for whatever healing the body can manage on its own. "The brain has its own wisdom," Amaru mutters as he works. "Sometimes it heals injuries that should be fatal. Sometimes it fails from wounds that seem minor. We do what we can and accept that the outcome rests with forces greater than our skill." When the last visible fragment is removed, Amaru places gold foil over the extensive wound, covering the damaged brain tissue. There's no way to replace the crushed skull section. It's too destroyed to use. The gold becomes the permanent covering, a metal shield where bone once protected. The suturing presents challenges. Much of the scalp was destroyed by the impact, and closing the wound requires careful placement to avoid excessive tension. Amaru demonstrates a technique you haven't seen before, creating relieving incisions to allow the skin edges to meet without pulling. The resulting scar will be large and unusual, but if Kusi survives, a scar is the least of concerns. Dawn finds the surgery complete and Kusi still alive, though his condition remains critical. Moving him now risks further damage, so the fishermen create a shelter in the cave mouth, building a wind barrier with reed mats, establishing a watch rotation. You volunteer for the first watch, sitting beside the unconscious boy as the Pacific sunrise paints the sky in shades of orange and pink. Kusi's breathing remains shallow but steady. His pupils react slightly to light, a hopeful sign suggesting his brainstem remains functional. But he doesn't wake, doesn't move. shows no signs of awareness. Time will tell if the surgery preserved enough brain function for meaningful survival. 3 days pass with Kusi hovering between life and death. He remains unconscious, his breathing steady but his mind absent. Amaru changes the dressing daily, checking for signs of infection. So far, miraculously, the wound remains clean. Perhaps the ocean air's moisture, which you expected to cause corruption, actually helps prevent it. Or perhaps it's simply fortune. You maintain vigil, learning to track the subtle signs that indicate whether a patient trends toward life or death. Skin temperature, pupil response, breathing pattern, the slight movements that indicate persisting brain function even when consciousness is absent. This watching, Amaru explains, is as important as the cutting. Recognizing early signs of deterioration allows intervention before death becomes inevitable. On the 4th day, Kusi's eyes open. The right eye wanders, not focusing properly, evidence of brain damage affecting the nerves that control eye movement. But the left eye finds his mother's face and stays there. Recognition, awareness, the faintest whisper, "Mama." His mother collapses in tears, clutching her son's hand. You feel your own eyes burning with unexpected emotion. 4 days ago, this boy should have died. The injury was catastrophic, the surgery performed in a cave by torchlight, every factor suggesting failure. Yet here he is, conscious, speaking, knowing his mother. Amaru's weathered face shows quiet satisfaction. This is why we fight even when hope seems lost. He tells you later, back in the settlement after Kusi has been carefully transported on a litter. Because sometimes, rarely, we witness something that seems touched by divine favor. Kusi will never be whole. His right eye will not focus correctly. His memory may have gaps. His coordination will be impaired. But he lives. He knows his name, his mother, his world. That is enough. Your training intensifies as the moon cycles toward the date Amaru specified, when the coastal winds shift and you'll perform your first solo surgery. You practice constantly, until the weight of tools feels natural in your hands, until the motion of cutting becomes instinct rather than conscious thought. You observe 2 more surgeries, both successful, both reinforcing the fundamental techniques and principles. At night, you dream of opened skulls and pulsing brain tissue, of gold foil catching lamplight, of the terrible responsibility of holding life in your hands. The dreams are not nightmares, but neither are they comfortable. They're preparation, your mind processing and integrating everything you're learning. The winds shift, the fishing runs begin, and with them comes your moment. A warrior named Atok arrives at the settlement, carried by 3 companions, his head wrapped in blood-soaked cloth. He was struck during a skirmish with Highland raiders. A sling stone caught him at the temple, fracturing the skull. The injury is serious, but Amaru judges after examination, within your capability. Tupac will perform this surgery, Amaru announces to the warrior's companions. I will supervise, but his hands will do the work. The companions exchange uncertain glances. They brought their friend to the famous master surgeon, not an untested apprentice. But Amaru's authority is absolute in medical matters. My student has trained 3 years. His hands are steady. His knowledge is sound. Trust, or take your warrior to another healer. They choose to trust, having little alternative. The nearest surgeon is 5 days' travel south, and Atok doesn't have 5 days. The surgery must happen now. Your hands shake as you arrange the instruments. Amaru stands beside you, close enough to intervene, but far enough to allow you autonomy. "Breathe, Tupac," he says quietly. "You know this work. Every motion has been practiced. Trust your training." Atok is conscious, watching you with pain-clouded eyes. You administer the chicha yourself, holding his head gently, speaking words of reassurance that sound hollow even to your own ears. But Atok drinks, and within minutes, the alcohol dulls his awareness. You make the first incision. The obsidian blade cuts cleanly through skin, and blood wells up, more than you expected, faster, forcing you to pause and dab it away. Your heart pounds so hard you can hear it in your ears. Beside you, Amaru says nothing, allowing you to solve the problem. You apply more pressure with the cotton cloth, and the bleeding slows enough to continue. The skull beneath shows the fracture, a depression where the sling stone struck, radiating cracks forming a star pattern. You select the bronze chisel, positioning it at the fracture's edge. Your first hammer strike is too timid, barely marking the bone. "Firmer," Amaru instructs. "The bone requires conviction." Your second strike is better, beginning the careful work of creating clean edges around the broken center. Time disappears. There is only the work. Cut, chisel, dab, suction, cut again. Your training takes over, your hands finding the rhythm Amaru drilled into you through endless practice. The broken section of skull comes free after what feels like hours but is probably minutes. You set it aside, your hands steadier now, and examine the dura beneath. A small tear, similar to Chasqui's case, blood pooling but not catastrophically. The familiarity is comforting. You've seen this before, you know the next steps. You use the reed tube to suction away accumulated blood and fluid. The brain beneath becomes visible, gray-pink tissue pulsing with each heartbeat. Even now, after seeing it multiple times, the sight fills you with awe. This tissue, these folds and convolutions somehow contain Atok's entire life. His warrior training, his love for his children, his knowledge of weapons and tactics, his fear of death. "Gold foil," Amaru prompts quietly. Your hands remember before your mind does, reaching for the delicate strips, placing them over the tear in the dura, then covering the skull opening. The metal settles into place, conforming to the curves beneath. Now the suturing. You thread the bronze needle with human hair, your fingers clumsy at first, then remembering the motion practiced 1,000 times on fruit and fish flesh. The first stitch is crooked, and you feel Amaru's disapproval like physical weight. The second is better. By the fifth, you've found the rhythm, 16 stitches total, creating a circle of surgical hair holding Atok's scalp together. The final dressing takes longer than it should. Your hands are cramping, exhaustion sudden and overwhelming now that the critical work is complete. But you finish, wrapping layer after layer of herb-soaked cotton, securing everything with woven strips. "Done," you whisper, stepping back. Your legs shake, threatening to collapse. Amaru's weathered hand grips your shoulder. "Done well," he corrects. "Atok will live because of your skill today, Tupac. This moment, your first surgery, is one you'll remember until your own death. You've crossed the threshold. You are no longer merely an apprentice. You are a healer." The words don't fully register through your exhaustion. But later, as you sit outside the surgical chamber breathing the cool coastal air, their weight settles on you. You saved a life today. Your hands, these same hands that once fumbled with herbs and dropped instruments, cut into a living skull and preserved the mind within. The responsibility is terrifying, The privilege is overwhelming. Tupac recovers smoothly. By the third day, he's conscious and complaining about forced rest, a good sign that his warrior spirit remains intact despite the skull opening. His companions thank you with gifts: dried meat, a finely woven headband, a small copper knife. You accept with humility, still feeling like an imposter, despite Amaru's declaration that you're now a healer. But the settlement sees you differently. Word spreads that the young apprentice performed his first trepanation successfully. People nod respectfully when you pass. Children stare, with mixture of fear and fascination. A mother approaches, asking if you can examine her daughter's persistent cough. You defer to Amaru, but the request marks a shift. You're being seen as someone with healing power, not merely a student following his master around. The responsibility weighs heavier than you expected. Every interaction now carries potential medical consequence. When the pottery merchant's wife asks if her husband's headaches are normal weeks after his surgery, your answer matters. When a fisherman inquires if his son's head injury needs skull opening or will heal naturally, your judgment could mean life or death. Amaru seems to recognize your struggle. One evening, he takes you walking along the clifftops overlooking the Pacific. The ocean stretches endlessly, its surface catching the setting sun in patterns of gold and crimson. Seabirds wheel and cry, diving for evening fish. When I was young like you, newly elevated to healer status, I felt crushed by responsibility, Amaru says, his voice barely audible over the wind and waves. Every patient represented potential failure, every decision a chance to cause harm rather than healing. The fear never fully leaves Tupac. Even after 30 years, before each surgery, I feel that same trembling in my hands, that same doubt in my heart. He pauses, picking up a smooth stone and hurling it toward the ocean far below. But I learned something essential. We are not gods. We are merely humans, with skills and knowledge, doing our best with imperfect tools in an imperfect world. Sometimes our best is enough. Sometimes it isn't. The key is to keep trying, keep learning, keep refining our technique, while accepting that we cannot save everyone. The wisdom settles into you slowly, like water soaking into dry earth. You won't always succeed. Some patients will die despite your best efforts, but giving up because of fear of failure means abandoning those who might have been saved. Months pass. You perform 3 more trepanations under Amaru's supervision, each one building confidence. A farmer crushed beneath a fallen wall, a child struck by a falling stone, a woman who developed pressure in her skull after a fever, this last case particularly challenging, as there was no visible injury to guide where to cut. Amaru taught you to read the subtle signs, which side of the head hurt most, where the swelling seemed worst, how the eyes moved differently, to determine the location of internal pressure. Each surgery is different, each patient presenting unique challenges, but the fundamental principles remain constant. Create clean access. Remove the immediate threat: fractured bone, accumulated blood, pressure causing swelling. Protect the brain with gold. Close carefully. Monitor vigilantly for signs of infection or deterioration. Your success rate is good. 5 surgeries, 4 complete recoveries, 1 partial recovery. The fever case, where the woman survived but with impaired speech and memory. You learn to live with imperfect outcomes, to accept that saving a life in diminished capacity is still saving a life. The settlement experiences a period of unusual peace. No major raids, no terrible accidents. Your days fill with routine medicine, treating infections, setting broken bones, delivering babies alongside Wyra, preparing medicines, The surgical chamber sits quiet for nearly a month, and you grow comfortable with its silence. Then the Highland Raiders come in force. 30 warriors descend on dawn, seeking supplies and captives. The settlement's men fight back with desperation, defending their families and homes. The battle is brief but brutal. War clubs against obsidian-tipped spears, stone axes against leather shields, hand-to-hand struggle in narrow passages between dwellings. When it ends, the raiders flee, repulsed but having caused terrible damage. 6 settlement defenders lie dead. 8 more lie wounded, and of these, 4 have head injuries serious enough to require surgery. 4 patients, all critical, all needing immediate attention. You stare at the bloody chaos of the settlement's central area, where the wounded are being gathered, and feel the crushing weight of inadequacy. Amaru appears beside you, his face grim. "We divide them," he says. "You take the 2 less critical cases. I take the 2 catastrophic ones. Wyra will assist us both, running between chambers with instruments. We work simultaneously. It's the only way to save any of the..." Your first patient is Sammy, a young warrior with a depressed skull fracture over his left eyebrow. The bone has been pushed inward but not shattered, a relatively straightforward elevation procedure. You work with focused speed, making the incision, reflecting the skin, using the bronze chisel to carefully lift the depressed section back into proper position. Gold foil, sutures, dressing. 40 minutes from start to finish. Patient 2 is harder. An older defender named Huaman struck twice, once on the crown, once on the temple. Dual fractures, both requiring attention, both bleeding into the brain space. You're forced to create 2 separate openings, working first on the more critical temple injury, then addressing the crown fracture. Blood loss is significant, and halfway through the second opening, Huaman's breathing becomes irregular, his pulse thready. "Stay with me," you command, your voice harsh with desperation. You've invested too much, come too far to lose him now. You work faster, accepting slightly less precision for the sake of speed. The pressure releases, the blood drains, and Huaman's breathing steadies. Not dead, not yet. The suturing takes forever, 2 separate circular wounds requiring separate sets of stitches. Your hands cramp painfully, but you push through. By the time you finish, 3 hours have passed. 3 hours of absolute focus during which the world outside the surgical chamber ceased to exist. You stumble out to find Amaru still working on his second patient. The surgery is not going well. You can see it in his posture, in the amount of blood pooled around the surgical platform, in the gray pallor of the patient's skin. This one is dying, despite everything Amaru can do. Some injuries are simply beyond even the master's skill. Wyra appears, exhausted, her tunic soaked with blood from running between chambers carrying instruments and supplies. "Your patients?" she asks. "Alive. Both alive." The words feel surreal. 4 hours ago, you'd never attempted surgery on more than 1 patient in a single day. Now you've saved 2 men with serious head trauma, working simultaneously while your master handled the worst cases. The absurdity of it, the terrible, beautiful absurdity makes you laugh. A slightly hysterical sound that draws Wyra's concerned look. "I'm fine," you assure her, "just tired." Amaru's second patient dies at sunset. The injury simply too severe. War Club had crushed the entire back of the skull, driving fragments deep into the brain's vital structures. There was never any real hope, but Amaru tried anyway, fighting death with every tool at his disposal. In the end, death won. It wins sometimes, despite everything. Of the 4 head injury cases, 3 survive. It's a remarkable rate for such devastating trauma. But the one death weighs on the settlement like physical presence. The dead man, Kari, was a respected elder, father of 7, grandfather of 12. His loss creates a hole in the community fabric. The funeral is held the next day. Bodies cannot wait in the coastal heat. The entire settlement gathers on the cliff tops to send Kari's spirit to the next world. His body, wrapped in the finest textile his family could provide, is placed in a stone-lined tomb with offerings of food, tools, and a ceramic vessel of chicha to ease his journey. You attend, standing with the other healers, feeling the weight of failure, even though Amaru assures you there was nothing to be done. Some injuries are incompatible with life, he tells you quietly as the morning songs rise toward the cloudless sky. We try anyway, because giving up means guaranteeing death. But trying doesn't always mean succeeding. The settlement takes 2 weeks to recover from the raid. The 3 survivors of head surgery heal at different rates. Sami, with his relatively straightforward fracture, is walking within days and returns to light duty within 2 weeks. Huaman struggles more. The dual injuries left him with persistent dizziness and headaches, though he retains his mental faculties and memory. Amaru's surviving patient, a warrior named Yaku, faces the longest recovery. Extensive brain damage leaves him unable to speak coherently, though he seems to understand what's said to him. 3 different outcomes from similar initial injuries. Amaru uses the cases for teaching. This demonstrates the unpredictability of brain trauma. Identical wounds can heal completely or leave permanent impairment. We do our best to create conditions for healing, but the brain's response remains mysterious, guided by forces we don't fully understand. You spend long hours with Yaku during his recovery, trying to determine the extent of his language loss. He can make sounds, but not words. He can gesture to indicate needs, but can't speak them. His family grieves this loss almost as much as if he'd died. A warrior who cannot communicate battle plans or tribal history loses much of his social value. Life settles into new rhythms. The raid prompts the settlement to improve defenses. Higher walls, better lookout positions, organized warrior training. But for you, the urgent crisis has revealed a limitation. The settlement needs more trained surgeons. Amaru is aging. You're newly capable, and the recent mass casualty event proved that 2 surgeons aren't enough for a community of 200 souls facing regular violence. Amaru makes a decision. He promotes Waira to full surgical training, despite tradition suggesting female healers should focus solely on childbirth. Skill matters more than custom, he declares when the settlement's council questions his choice. Waira has the hands, the mind, and the courage. She will learn the skull opening. You become a teacher as well as a healer, guiding Waira through the same apprenticeship you completed, demonstrating on animal skulls, explaining anatomy, sharing the hard-won wisdom of your own recent failures and successes. It's strange standing in Amaru's position, seeing your younger self reflected in Waira's anxious determination. Months cycle into a year, then another. You perform 23 trepanations in your 2nd year, 31 in your 3rd. Some are emergency trauma from warfare or accidents. Others are elective, removing persistent pressure, treating seizures that your people believe result from evil spirits trapped in the skull. Opening the bone creates an escape route for these spirits, often successfully stopping the seizures through mechanisms you don't fully understand. Your success rate improves with experience. 78% of patients survive with full or near full recovery. 15% survive with significant impairment. 7% die despite surgery. These numbers, tracked carefully by Amaru on painted clay tablets, compare favorably to other surgeons across the coastal settlements. You're 23 now. No longer an apprentice, but not yet a master, Amaru has begun teaching you advanced techniques, approaching brain bleeds from different angles, managing patients with multiple skull fractures, even attempting tumor removal, though this rarely succeeds. The field of surgical knowledge expands constantly as practitioners share techniques during inter-settlement gatherings. At one such gathering, you meet a master surgeon from the southern valleys who has developed a new approach to reducing infection, soaking all instruments in the boiled sap of the molly tree before surgery. His infection rate, he reports, dropped by nearly half after implementing this practice. Amaru begins suffering headaches in your 4th year as a practicing healer. At first, he dismisses them as the normal complaints of aging, but they intensify, blinding pain that forces him to lie in darkness for hours, accompanied by vomiting and confusion. You examine him with growing concern, recognizing symptoms that suggest pressure building inside his skull. "We need to open your skull," you tell him with as much authority as you can muster. "Something grows inside, pressing on my brain. Without surgery, the pressure will kill you." Amaru laughs. "I know the diagnosis, Tupac. I've seen it before. The growth that cannot be removed, that returns even when we try to cut it away. Opening my skull will buy days or weeks, not years." He grips your arm. "Save your skill for those who can truly benefit. I'm 56 winters old. I've lived a full life, trained excellent students. Death comes for everyone eventually. Mine comes sooner rather than later." You argue, but Amaru is adamant. He refuses surgery, choosing to face death on his own terms rather than prolonged suffering. The settlement mourns even before his death, understanding that the master healer has entered his final days. Amaru spends his remaining time organizing knowledge. He summons you and Wyra daily, dictating everything he knows: techniques, herb preparations, anatomical observations, patient histories. A priest is enlisted to paint these teachings on the walls of a specially prepared chamber, creating a permanent record so Amaru's wisdom won't die with him. "The brain is the final mystery," Amaru says during one of these sessions, his voice but determined. "We can cut into it. We can see it pulse with life. But we cannot truly understand how it creates thought, memory, emotion. Perhaps humans will never understand. Perhaps some knowledge belongs only to the gods. But we must keep trying. Keep learning, keep pushing against the boundaries of ignorance." Amaru dies 3 months after the headaches began, surrounded by his students and family. His death is peaceful. He slips into unconsciousness during the night and simply doesn't wake. The settlement grieves deeply, recognizing they've lost not just a healer, but a repository of decades of accumulated wisdom. The funeral is elaborate, befitting a master of his status. His body is wrapped in the finest textiles, surrounded by his surgical instruments, paint brushes, and the painted skull specimens he used for teaching. The tomb is prepared on the highest cliff, where his spirit can watch over the settlement he served for 30 years. You become the head surgeon at 24, younger than traditional, but undeniable in skill. Wyra becomes your second, having completed her training and performed 12 successful trepanations. Together you serve the settlement, carrying Amaru's legacy forward while adding your own innovations and observations. The pressure of leadership proves heavier than expected. Every death feels personal now. There's no master to defer to, no higher authority to share the burden of difficult decisions. A young mother dies of infection after surgery despite your best efforts. And you spend sleepless nights wondering if you missed some sign, made some error that caused her death. Eventually, you remember Amaru's words. We are not gods, merely humans doing our best. You begin training 2 new apprentices, young men showing the steady hands and patient temperaments required for surgical work. Teaching forces you to examine your own techniques more carefully, to understand the why behind the how, to articulate knowledge that has become instinctive. The settlement thrives, growing to nearly 300 souls. Trade expands with neighboring villages, bringing new ideas and techniques. You learn of a surgeon 2 days north who has developed a method for treating skull infections by drilling small holes to drain pus. You travel to observe this technique and incorporate it into your own practice. Your reputation grows. Injured warriors are brought from distant settlements, their families having heard of the young healer who learned from the great Amaru. You treat them all, wealthy and poor, warrior and farmer, accepting payment in goods when offered, but never refusing treatment to those who cannot pay. You're 27 when the Spanish arrive. They're not Spanish yet. They're just strange people with pale skin and unusual clothes. Traders who have made their way down the coast from the far north. Speaking of great civilizations beyond the mountains, they bring metal tools sharper than bronze, glass beads of impossible colors, and new diseases against which your people have no defense. The first smallpox outbreak kills 40 people in 3 weeks. Nothing in your training prepared you for this. The fever, the erupting sores, the way it spreads from person to person, like wildfire through dry grass. You try everything: herbs, isolation, prayer, even experimental surgery to drain fluid from the worst cases. Nothing helps. The disease runs its course, claiming primarily the very young and very old, leaving the rest marked with pox scars. The settlement recovers from smallpox, but it's forever changed. The disease killed healers and patients indiscriminately. Even those who survived skull surgery succumbed to the new illness. The survivors view the foreign traders with suspicion now, recognizing that strange outsiders bring not just novel goods, but invisible death. You restrict access to the settlement, establishing quarantine protocols. Any trader or visitor from distant areas must camp outside the walls for 2 weeks before entering. If they develop no sickness during this time, they may enter. Some traders refuse, taking their goods elsewhere. Others comply, respecting the medical authority you've established. Your surgical practice evolves. You document everything now, following Amaru's example but expanding it, creating detailed painted records of each surgery, noting what worked and what failed, building a comprehensive knowledge base. The painted chamber of medical knowledge grows, walls filling with information that will outlast your own lifetime. You're 31 when you perform your most challenging surgery, a warrior with a weapon fragment driven deep into his brain. The obsidian spear point broke off inside his skull during combat, and removing it requires working deeper into brain tissue than you've ever gone before. The surgery takes 6 hours, pushing the limits of what you thought possible. The warrior survives, but with significant personality changes. Once calm and measured, he becomes impulsive and angry. His family thanks you for saving his life, but mourns the man he was. This case teaches you something important. Different brain regions control different functions. Damage to the frontal area affects personality and judgment. Damage to the sides affects movement and sensation. The back controls vision. You begin mapping these observations, creating crude diagrams that show which brain areas govern which functions. It's pioneering work, the kind of knowledge that will help future healers save lives. Wyra performs her first completely solo surgery, a fishing accident with a depressed skull fracture. You supervise from a distance, watching as she works with steady competence. When she finishes, successfully completing the procedure without requiring your intervention. You feel a surge of pride and also melancholy, the student becoming the teacher, the cycle continuing, time moving forward whether you're ready or not. You marry at 33, a weaver named Quilla, whose steady presence and quiet humor balance the intense demands of healing work. She understands when you're called away in the middle of the night, when you return home splattered with blood, when you're too exhausted to speak. Your first child, a daughter, is born the following year. You name her Amaru, honoring your master teacher. Your daughter grows in the settlement that has known you as healer since you were 17. She toddles through the surgical chamber while you work on documentation. Too young to understand, but already familiar with the tools and smells of healing. Quilla worries sometimes. What if Amaru the daughter wishes to follow Amaru the master's path? The surgical arts are dangerous, demanding, and fill one's life with death alongside healing. If she chooses this path, we'll support her, you tell Quilla. And if she chooses weaving like you, we'll support that too. The person chooses the work, not the parent. But little Amaru shows more interest in her mother's loom than in surgical instruments, and you're secretly relieved. The path of healer is noble, but terrible. You wouldn't wish its burdens on your child unless she felt the calling as strongly as you did. You're 35 when disaster strikes. An earthquake. Rare on this coastal stretch, but devastating when it comes. The settlement is built on hillsides, and when the earth shakes, stone buildings collapse. The tremor lasts perhaps 30 heartbeats, but in that brief time, the landscape transforms. Buildings reduced to rubble, carefully built walls tumbled to heaps of stone, and worst of all, people trapped beneath. The casualties are overwhelming. 20 dead immediately, crushed by falling stone. 35 seriously injured, many with head trauma from falling debris. You, Wyra, and your 2 trained apprentices work without rest for 3 days, performing emergency surgeries in a commandeered building that survived the quake. You operate on 9 patients with critical head injuries. Wyra handles 7. Your apprentices, now skilled enough for straightforward cases, each take 4. It's brutal work. No time for careful technique, just rapid intervention to relieve pressure, stop bleeding, give each patient a chance at survival. You work until your hands cramp into claws, until exhaustion makes your vision blur, until you honestly can't remember which patient you're treating or how many you've already seen. Some surgeries happen simultaneously in the same room. All 4 healers working at once, the space filled with blood and the sounds of suffering. Family members pack the doorway, waiting, praying, offering what help they can. The settlement's priests maintain constant vigil, burning offerings, chanting prayers to Pachamama, begging the Earth Mother to stop taking her children. When the crisis finally subsides, the numbers become clear. Of the 24 who received emergency skull surgery, 17 survive, 7 die. 4 during surgery, 3 from subsequent infection or brain damage proving too severe. It's a remarkable survival rate given the circumstances, but the 7 deaths weigh on you nonetheless. The settlement recovers from smallpox, but it's forever changed. The disease killed healers and patients indiscriminately. Even those who survived skull surgery succumbed to the new illness. The survivors view the foreign traders with suspicion now, recognizing that strange outsiders bring not just novel goods, but invisible death. You restrict access to the settlement, establishing quarantine protocols. Any trader or visitor from distant areas must camp outside the walls for 2 weeks before entering. If they develop no sickness during this time, they may enter. Some traders refuse, taking their goods elsewhere. Others comply, respecting the medical authority you've established. Your surgical practice evolves. You document everything now, following Amaru's example but expanding it, creating detailed painted records of each surgery, noting what worked and what failed, building a comprehensive knowledge base. The painted chamber of medical knowledge grows, walls filling with information that will outlast your own lifetime. You're 31 when you perform your most challenging surgery, a warrior with a weapon fragment driven deep into his brain. The obsidian spear point broke off inside his skull during combat, and removing it requires working deeper into brain tissue than you've ever gone before. The surgery takes 6 hours, pushing the limits of what you thought possible. The warrior survives, but with significant personality changes. Once calm and measured, he becomes impulsive and angry. His family thanks you for saving his life, but mourns the man he was. This case teaches you something important. Different brain regions control different functions. Damage to the frontal area affects personality and judgment. Damage to the sides affects movement and sensation. The back controls vision. You begin mapping these observations, creating crude diagrams that show which brain areas govern which functions. It's pioneering work, the kind of knowledge that will help future healers save lives. Wyra performs her first completely solo surgery, a fishing accident with a depressed skull fracture. You supervise from a distance, watching as she works with steady competence. When she finishes, successfully completing the procedure without requiring your intervention, you feel a surge of pride and also melancholy. The student becoming the teacher, the cycle continuing, time moving forward whether you're ready or not. You marry at 33, a weaver named Quilla, whose steady presence and quiet humor balance the intense demands of healing work. She understands when you're called away in the middle of the night, when you return home splattered with blood, when you're too exhausted to speak. Your first child, a daughter, is born the following year. You name her Amaru, honoring your master teacher. The years accumulate. You're 42 when Spanish explorers actually reach your region. Not traders, but soldiers and priests, seeking gold and souls to convert. They're accompanied by diseases that make the earlier smallpox outbreak seem merciful. Measles, typhus, influenza. Waves of illness that sweep through the coastal settlements, killing 20, 30, sometimes 40% of the population. You fight these invisible enemies with the only tools you have: quarantine, isolation of the sick, herbs that sometimes reduce fever but never cure the underlying illness. The surgical skills that make you famous are useless against these new plagues. You watch helplessly as patients die from fevers and rashes and respiratory failure. Unable to help, unable to stop the dying, the Spanish priests observe your medical work with interest. One, a young man named Father Miguel, speaks some of your language learned from coastal informants. He watches you perform a trepanation, a fishing accident, another depressed skull fracture, and afterward approaches with a mixture of admiration and horror. You cut into the brain, the seat of the soul, he says through his interpreter. This should not be possible, yet the patient lives. Your people possess medical knowledge we lack in España. You explain the technique, the careful cutting, the pressure relief, the gold foil protection. Father Miguel listens intently, occasionally making notes in a small book with mysterious markings. Writing you'll learn later, though the concept remains foreign. He asks if you believe the brain contains the soul, or if the soul resides elsewhere. I don't know where the soul lives, you tell him honestly, but I know the brain contains memory, personality, speech, movement. Damage to different areas causes different losses. Whether this is the soul or something else, I cannot say. I only know that protecting the brain allows the person to continue being themselves. Father Miguel seems troubled by this answer. His religion has certain beliefs about souls and bodies that your pragmatic observations challenge, but he respects your skill, even as he attempts to convert your settlement to his foreign god. The Spanish presence changes everything. More foreigners arrive: soldiers, administrators, settlers. They build their own settlements nearby, bringing their animals, crops, diseases, and gods. Your traditional ways begin eroding under pressure to adopt Spanish customs, language, religion. You're 45 when the Spanish authorities formally establish colonial administration over your region. Your settlement, which has governed itself for generations, now answers to Spanish officials who know nothing of your customs, your history, your medical traditions. Taxes are imposed, tribute in dried fish, textiles, and labor. The traditional autonomy of coastal settlements dissolves into colonial bureaucracy. The Spanish show particular interest in your surgical practice. Officials arrive with questions. How many patients do you treat? What is your success rate? Can your techniques be taught to Spanish physicians? You answer honestly, demonstrating on animal skulls, explaining the generations of accumulated knowledge that created your surgical tradition. A Spanish physician named Dr. Hernandez arrives from Lima to observe. He's older than you, trained in European medical schools, carrying books filled with anatomical drawings and classical theories. He watches you perform trepanation with obvious skepticism. European medicine rarely involves skull opening, considering it too dangerous and primitive. But when your patient survives, walks, speaks, and retains full mental function, Dr. Hernandez's skepticism transforms into reluctant admiration. You people have developed techniques we've lost or never possessed, he admits through an interpreter. In España, opening the skull almost always means death. Yet you achieve success routinely. This knowledge should be preserved, documented, shared with the medical community in Europe. You feel conflicted about this. Part of you wants your knowledge recognized, validated, spread to help more people. But another part fears what happens when traditional wisdom passes into foreign hands. Will credit be given? Will your people's contributions be acknowledged? Or will Spanish physicians claim these techniques as their own discoveries? The coastal settlements face pressure to abandon traditional practices in favor of Spanish methods. Some healers convert to Christianity, incorporating Catholic prayers into their medical rituals. Others resist, maintaining the old ways in secret. You navigate a middle path, continuing your surgical work while superficially adopting Spanish religious customs that satisfy colonial authorities without truly abandoning your traditional beliefs. Your hands worsen with age. The joint stiffness becomes pain, especially in cold or damp weather. You develop techniques to work around the limitations. Different grips, different angles, relying more on apprentices for the extended surgeries. But you recognize your time as an active surgeon is ending. Your role increasingly shifts to teacher, advisor, keeper of knowledge. Wyra becomes the primary surgeon, with your 2 senior apprentices handling routine cases. You reserve your diminishing capacity for the most complex situations. The cases where experience matters more than dexterity, where judgment trumps manual facility. You're 50 when smallpox returns, more virulent than before. This outbreak devastates the coastal settlements. Half the population falls ill, and of those, half die. The death toll is catastrophic. Entire families wiped out, children orphaned. The fabric of traditional society tears apart as disease accomplishes what warfare never could. You work yourself to exhaustion, treating the sick, though you know your efforts are largely futile. The pustules erupt, the fevers rage, and all you can do is provide comfort, reduce suffering, and occasionally save those strong enough to survive. Your surgical skills offer nothing against this invisible enemy. Little Amaru, now 16, helps nurse the sick despite your protests. She has her mother's courage and her namesake's determination. When Quilla falls ill, Amaru refuses to leave her mother's side, bathing her fever-hot skin, forcing water past cracked lips, praying to both Pachamama and the Christian God for healing. Quilla survives, marked forever by pox scars, but alive. Many others aren't as fortunate. The settlement's population drops from 300 to barely 150. The survivors are traumatized, grieving, struggling to understand why the gods, old and new, allowed such devastation. In the aftermath, you realize something profound. Your traditional medical knowledge, so effective against trauma and skull injuries, offers almost nothing against the diseases the Spanish brought. Your people are vulnerable in ways you never imagined. The surgical skills passed down through generations suddenly seem insufficient for this new reality. Spanish physicians arrive with their own treatments, bloodletting, purging, remedies that often seem to worsen rather than help. You observe their methods with skepticism, seeing that they understand these new diseases no better than you do. Medicine itself, whether Spanish or Paracas, stands helpless before epidemic disease. You throw yourself into documentation. If the traditional surgical knowledge is to survive this period of catastrophic population loss, it must be recorded more thoroughly than ever. You spend long hours painting detailed surgical procedures on the walls of the medical chamber, creating a visual textbook for future generations. Wyra assists with this project, adding her own observations and techniques. Together, you create the most comprehensive medical record your culture has ever produced. Every skull opening technique, every complication and how to handle it, every anatomical observation accumulated over decades of practice. Your daughter watches sometimes, still preferring weaving to medicine, but understanding the importance of preserving this knowledge. Someday, she says, studying the painted walls, people will look at this and know my father was a great healer. Spanish authorities increasingly interfere with traditional medical practices. A colonial administrator issues a decree. All medical procedures must be approved by Spanish physicians. Trepanation, in particular, is viewed with suspicion. Too barbaric, too primitive, too successful in ways that challenge European medical authority. You continue practicing in secret when necessary, performing surgeries in private chambers, using trusted intermediaries to bring patients. The Spanish physician Dr. Hernandez, who has observed your work and respects your skill, sometimes provides cover, claiming to supervise procedures that he actually has nothing to do with. This underground practice feels wrong. Medicine should be public, accessible, transparent, but colonial reality forces adaptation. You treat those who need treatment, regardless of official approval, accepting the risk of punishment. You're 52 when soldiers arrive at your dwelling with an arrest warrant. A Spanish official has accused you of practicing unauthorized medicine, of performing dangerous procedures without proper supervision. The charge is serious. Colonial law imposes harsh penalties on those who defy medical regulations. Dr. Hernandez intervenes. He testifies to your skill, produces records of your success rates, argues that your surgical techniques represent valuable medical knowledge that should be preserved, not suppressed. His testimony carries weight. He's a credentialed European physician, his word trusted by colonial authorities in ways yours never could be. The charges are reduced to a fine and a warning. Continue only with Spanish supervision. It's humiliating, but better than imprisonment or execution. You pay the fine, accept the conditions, and continue working under the fiction of Spanish oversight. This incident hardens your determination to preserve traditional knowledge. The colonial system wants to erase or claim ownership of medical techniques your people developed over generations. You won't allow that erasure without fight. A quiet fight of documentation, teaching, ensuring the knowledge survives, even if it must go underground. Your daughter Amaru marries a potter from a neighboring settlement. She moves away, starting her own family, weaving beautiful textiles that incorporate traditional patterns with Spanish-influenced designs. You miss her presence, but take pride in her success. She carries forward traditional knowledge in her own way, through art rather than medicine. You're 55 when the first Spanish-trained mestizo physician appears, a young man of mixed Spanish and indigenous heritage educated in Lima, returning to practice medicine in his mother's homeland. His name is Diego, and he approaches you with respect, asking to learn the traditional skull surgery techniques. You're suspicious at first. Is this another attempt to appropriate indigenous knowledge? But Diego proves genuine. He studied European anatomy, but recognizes gaps in Spanish medical knowledge. He wants to integrate the best of both traditions. You teach Diego, finding unexpected satisfaction in training someone who bridges both medical worlds. He already knows European anatomy from his formal education, so you can focus on surgical technique, the precise angles for cutting, the feel of bone thickness, the subtle signs that indicate when you're about to breach the inner skull layer. Diego learns quickly. His European training gives him framework, your practical experience gives him skill. Together, you perform a complex surgery on a mestizo merchant struck by falling cargo, dual skull fractures requiring 2 separate openings. Diego handles one opening under your supervision. You handle the other, despite your arthritic hands protesting every movement. The surgery succeeds. The merchant recovers fully. And afterward, Diego does something unexpected. He writes a formal medical paper in Spanish, documenting the procedure, giving full credit to your traditional techniques, naming you as the senior surgeon. He submits it to medical authorities in Lima, arguing that indigenous surgical knowledge deserves recognition and preservation. The paper is rejected. Colonial medical authorities aren't ready to acknowledge that primitive peoples possess advanced surgical skills. But Diego makes copies, shares them with sympathetic physicians, plants seeds that might someday grow into recognition. You're 58 when your hands finally force retirement from active surgery. The arthritis has progressed too far. Your grip is weak, your fine motor control unreliable. You attempt one last procedure, a routine trepanation on a young warrior with a depressed fracture, and your trembling hands nearly cause disaster. Only Waira's quick intervention prevents serious error. That night, you remove Amaru's red headband and offer it to Waira. She's earned it. 20 years of surgical practice, hundreds of successful procedures, dozens of trained students. She's become the master you once were, the keeper of knowledge, the bridge between past and future. I don't want it, Wyra says quietly. You're still the master. You still teach, still guide, still know more than any of us. Knowledge in the head is useless if the hands cannot execute. You reply, you're the master surgeon now. I'm just an old man who remembers things. She accepts the headband with tears in her eyes, understanding this marks not just transition of authority, but acknowledgement of your mortality. You're 60 years old, ancient by the standards of your culture. Each day is a gift, each sunrise unexpected. Retirement doesn't mean idleness. You spend your remaining energy teaching anyone willing to learn. Spanish physicians, mestizo students, traditional apprentices. The medical chamber becomes a gathering place where European anatomy meets indigenous surgical technique, where different traditions exchange knowledge for the benefit of future patients. Diego brings a Spanish artist, a man trained in realistic drawing, to document your surgical techniques. Over weeks, the artist creates detailed illustrations, far more precise than your painted records, showing exact anatomical relationships, step-by-step procedures, complications and their solutions. These drawings will be included in medical texts sent to Spain, finally giving your culture's medical achievements the recognition they deserve. You pose for a portrait, the artist insists. You sit in the medical chamber surrounded by your painted records, wearing simple clothing, your arthritic hands folded in your lap. The artist captures something in your face, some combination of pride and sorrow, wisdom and weariness. When the portrait is finished, you barely recognize yourself. Is this old man really you? When did you become so ancient? Your health declines slowly, not catastrophically, but steadily. The inexorable erosion of age. Your lungs struggle in cold weather. Your joints ache constantly. Your vision dims, making detailed work impossible. You spend days sitting in the sun, watching the settlement's life flow around you, occasionally offering advice when consulted, but mostly just observing. Wyra continues the surgical practice brilliantly. Diego establishes a practice combining European and indigenous techniques. The younger apprentices progress. The knowledge survives. You've done what you set out to do. Preserve and pass forward the healing arts that Amaru taught you 43 years ago. You're 62 when word arrives that your daughter Amaru has given birth to twin boys. You make the difficult journey to her settlement to meet your grandsons, knowing it may be the last time you see her. The trip exhausts you. What once took a day now requires 3, with frequent stops to rest your failing body. But meeting your grandsons makes every difficult step worthwhile. You hold them carefully, these tiny new lives who carry your blood forward into an uncertain future. Tell them about their great-grandfather, Amaru. You ask your daughter, tell them about the healers who came before. Don't let them forget where they come from. She promises, tears streaming down her face as she recognizes how frail you've become. You stay a week, enjoying the simple pleasure of family before making the exhausting return journey. You're 63 when you feel death approaching. It's not dramatic, No sudden illness, no crisis, just a gradual weakening, a sense of systems shutting down, of the body preparing for its final transition. You've seen it enough times in others to recognize it in yourself. You ask Wyra to carry you one last time to the medical chamber. She does, enlisting helpers, moving you carefully. You want to see the painted walls one final time, the accumulated knowledge of generations, the visual legacy that will outlive your failing body. Sitting there, surrounded by surgical diagrams and patient records, you feel profound satisfaction. This knowledge will survive. Future healers will learn from these walls. The techniques that saved hundreds of lives during your practice will save hundreds more after you're gone. Diego visits, bringing news that his medical paper has finally been accepted by authorities in Lima. Recognition came too late for you to enjoy fully, but it came. Your culture's surgical achievements will be documented, preserved, acknowledged in the wider medical world. Students come to pay respects, some you trained directly, others who learned from your students. They gather around, and you offer final wisdom, but words carefully chosen. Medicine is both science and art. The science can be taught, anatomy, technique, procedure, but the art, knowing when to cut and when to wait, reading the subtle signs, maintaining hope when reason suggests despair, that comes only through experience and reflection. Teach both. Never stop learning. Never stop questioning. Each patient teaches something if you're willing to listen. Wyra holds your hand, the same hand that once guided her through her first surgical attempts, now gnarled and useless, but still capable of offering comfort through touch. You ask to be carried home, back to the dwelling you've shared with memories of Quilla. She died 2 years ago. You've been lonely since. You settle onto your sleeping mat, covered with the finest alpaca blanket your daughter wove specially for you. The settlement's priest comes to perform traditional rituals preparing your spirit for its journey to the next world. A Spanish priest also comes, offering Christian last rites. You accept both, hedging spiritual bets, ensuring safe passage regardless of which religious system proves correct. Your vision dims further, faces blur. You hear voices, but can't always distinguish who speaks. Time becomes uncertain. Is it day or night? How long have you been lying here? Does it matter? In your final hours, your mind drifts through memories. You're 17 again, waking before dawn for your first surgical observation. Terrified and excited, you feel the weight of the obsidian blade in your hand during your first solo surgery. You see Amaru's weathered face lit by lamplight, teaching patience and precision. You remember Chasqui opening his eyes after surgery, proof that desperate interventions sometimes succeed. You recall holding your daughter for the first time, marveling that your blood-stained surgical hands could create new life, as well as preserve existing life. The memories flood through without linear order. 50 years of healing compressed into final moments. You see every patient you saved and every patient you lost. You feel every triumph and every failure. The weight of accumulated experience settles over you, not crushing, but somehow comforting. You did the work. You passed the knowledge forward. Your life had meaning. Wyra's voice reaches through the fog. Master, can you hear me? You try to answer, but aren't sure if words emerge. You want to tell her she's been an excellent student, that the art of healing is safe in her capable hands, that you're proud of what she's accomplished. Maybe you managed to communicate this. Maybe it's just thought without voice. You feel no pain now, just a gentle floating sensation. Your breathing slows, each breath requiring more effort than the last. You're not afraid. Death is just the final mystery, and you've spent your life confronting mysteries with curiosity rather than fear. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the Pacific roaring against coastal cliffs, the eternal rhythm that has formed the backdrop of your entire life. The sound is comforting, a reminder that the ocean continues its work regardless of individual human lives beginning or ending. Your last conscious thought is of Amaru, not your daughter, but your master teacher, and you wonder if you'll see him again in whatever comes next. You hope so. You have questions you never asked, techniques you wanted to discuss one more time. Then the thoughts stop. The breathing stops. The ancient healer who opened skulls and saved lives, who bridged traditional and colonial medical worlds, who preserved generations of surgical knowledge for futures he would never see, makes his final transition from life to whatever lies beyond. So now you know the truth they never taught you in school. For over 2,000 years before European medicine discovered brain surgery, the Paracas healers of ancient Peru were opening skulls with obsidian blades and achieving success rates that modern surgeons respect. They developed techniques, gold plates protecting the brain, precise anatomical knowledge, infection control methods that seem impossible for their era. Tupac lived this reality, carrying forward knowledge that saved hundreds of lives in a world where violence and accidents made skull injuries heartbreakingly common. His painted medical records survived in some cases, discovered by archaeologists centuries later. The skulls tell the story: clean surgical edges, healed bone, evidence of patients living years after their brains were exposed to bronze and obsidian. These were real people, real healers, real patients, real surgical skill passed master to apprentice across generations. Now rest easy, knowing that even in humanity's most ancient times, some among us dedicated their lives to preserving others. Sleep well. Thank you for following Tupac's journey, from anxious apprentice to master surgeon. If you enjoyed this documentary bedtime story exploring forgotten medical history, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing which ancient civilization or historical practice you'd like to explore next. Sweet dreams. And remember, the past was far more sophisticated than we often imagine.